welcome everyone to Think Seen and Unseen in Today's Uncertain World with Bruno Giussani. My name is José Cruzet, and on behalf of CASA SEAT, I say hello and welcome you and give a thank you to you and also to CASA SEAT to give the opportunity for this interesting event. Let me introduce you to Bruno Giussani, who is in fact actually a friend of CASA SEAT. He wanted to come last year, but last year, due to the pandemic, he could not come physically, but we organized an event with him online, so he gave a talk online, and he promised to us to come here whenever things are open again, and since now things are open again, we have the pleasure to have him here with us. Bruno is the curator of TED Global. It's the organization behind TED events and TED Talks. You all know what TED Talks are, these famous TED Talks from Bill Gates and Sir Ken Robinson. But here in CASA SEAT, there are also not TED Talks or TED events, but TEDx events. Actually, CASA SEAT is a host of TEDx Barcelona events. TEDx is similar to TED. TEDx is an organization locally organized. They organize, the team from here organizes events similar to TED in the United States, but independently from TED. And we have these events bi-monthly here. The team is sitting here at the first row. We have here 3 volunteers together with me. We are organizing events here bi-monthly. The next event will be on May 18th. It's free, so if you want, please sign up. So back to Bruno. Since joining TED in 2005, he organized various TED Global events, and he curated, he's a curator, he curated hundreds of TED Talks from scientists, visionaries, designers, technologists, activists, economists, all kinds of people. And before joining TED, he was a fellow of Stanford University, and he has led the online strategy of the World Economic Forum. Now he's still the chairman of the International Film Festival on Human Rights in Geneva. So please give a warm welcome to Bruno.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So I would like to tell you what we do. We will have a short conversation. We will talk here together about half an hour, and we ask him about his vision about things seen and unseen in today's uncertain world. And afterwards, we will open the floor so that you also can ask him questions, but also maybe you have different views, express your opinion. So let's start now. Maybe we start with your job title, curator. What is a curator? What does a curator do?
Yeah, it's a difficult title to translate, but the aim of the job is to filter through the mass of information and ideas that is present in our lives in an increasing way, and to try to organize it by creating hierarchies, by structuring links between things that are seemingly unconnected, and so it's the kind of job that a museum curator would do, of course, but also the editor of a magazine. You have this mass of information coming at you, and then you need to structure it by deciding what you write about, what you put on the front page, what you put on page 22, what you don't publish in the magazine because it's not relevant. So that's the job. And we apply that to ideas. And ideas is a big label. Ideas are really a label that we use to describe anything from scientific research to personal experiences, to lessons learned, to best practices, to arts and culture, and we try to encapsulate that in the videos you mentioned before, the TED Talks. And what a TED Talk really is one person stands up in front of other people and tells a story. That's what it is. So it's the oldest social media we have. Somebody shares a story and an idea and an emotional experience with other people.
Mm. So you're more or less responsible for the huge success TED has, right?
I definitely am responsible for a tiny part of that. My colleagues are responsible for the rest. It's a big company now. When I started, we were probably less than 10. Now we are more than 250 around the world. The platform has become big in many different ways. It's also not only made of videos. Many people may know TED only through the videos, but actually the platform involves a lot of different formats, a lot of conferences, TEDx conferences, 3,000 of them, more than 3,000 of them in 2019, so pre-pandemic. Our official conferences, but we also have, podcasts and educational programs and social media accounts that are pretty active and many other things. So it's a multifaceted platform, and the goal is always the same for all these pieces, is disseminate ideas that matter.
You're not only the curator and organizer, the curator of TED Global, but you're also the founder, organizer, and curator of TED Countdown. It's an initiative in the area of climate change. It's an event where climate activists come together to discuss and to talk about ideas how to fight climate change. Tell us a bit more about this.
Not only activists.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. No, TED has always been about disseminating ideas. And then when you put somebody on stage and tells a story, people come to you and say, okay, now what happens with that idea? How can we help make that happen, make that reality? And we've had forever talks about climate and talks about the environment and talks about biodiversity, but we never really went beyond putting the story out there, which we always thought, okay, it's per se something positive. It's the same thing as, sending children to school. You don't question it. You may question how the teaching happens, but you don't question the principle of sending children to school. So disseminating ideas is per se a good thing. We always kind of focus on that. And then little by little, it became evident that we needed to do a bit more. And the more is to try to accelerate the actual realization of some ideas. And Countdown is built a bit on that. Countdown is the countdown to 2030 and 2050. You all know that according to science and the Paris Agreement, we need to decarbonize we need to decarbonize by half our economy by 2030 and then down to zero, net zero in 2050. Those dates are not like thresholds where, if you don't do it the next morning, the world falls off a cliff. But it gives an indication of the urgency of the problem. And so we decided 2 years ago that we would focus a full project on that, putting all the resources of TED, including the formats we have, the digital platforms, the reach of the digital platforms, the capacity to convene people, the capacity to mobilize resources within our community and beyond, and so on, behind a climate project. And the full focus of the project is identifying ideas that can be partial solutions to the climate crisis and highlight them and accelerate them. Anything from how do we decarbonize, transport, since we are at CASA SEAT. How do we decarbonize the electricity grid? How do we decarbonize cement and steel and aviation? And how do we redesign cities? How do we regenerate forests and all these things? All of that is part of this project.
A big part of the climate goals is about energy. Energy prices are skyrocketing now. We don't want to talk about the war in Ukraine because this is negative enough, but let's say one part why the prices are so high now is because of the war in Ukraine. Do you think that the war indirectly is accelerating the transition away from fossil fuels?
Yes and no. Yes and no, because what happened is after many years of hesitation and pushback and climate denial and lobbying by fossil fuel companies, and so that was kind of slowing down action on climate change. I'm really simplifying here, but we have known about climate change for decades. But action has always been slow because there's been a whole set of pushbacks. And after many years, finally, a few years ago, we started seeing momentum. We started seeing real change and real action for many different reasons. There was pressure coming from the streets, the youth movements, Greta Thunberg and so. There were significant new technological developments that would help push this forward. The prices of key things like solar and wind have come down dramatically. The prices of batteries have come down dramatically. A lot of people got involved starting climate or environmental-oriented companies that were actually not activists but entrepreneurs. They know how to build companies and to scale them up. A lot of money has been diverted into that. So we had all this momentum, and then suddenly the pandemic came, and then the war came, and everything kind of slows down, and then the war makes it even more slow down, because the challenge has become a tension between the climate issue we need to solve, or we need to confront. We are not going to solve it, but we need to confront, and energy security and energy access. So do we privilege the short-term security of our energy supply, and we wait to act on climate, or do we accelerate the transition because that's the ultimate long-term and medium-term goal? My impression is Europe is going in that direction, at least so far, by trying to accelerate the transition towards cleaner energy, although it's not clear that we know exactly how to do it. It's not clear that we are all aligned. For example, Germany is shutting down their nuclear plants. France is building a dozen new nuclear plants. So the method is not necessarily
The same.
aligned. The United States seems to be going the opposite direction and saying, no, we need to keep energy prices low, particularly gas for cars, and so we're going to pump more oil, and we're going to wait to act on climate, right? I say they seem because, of course, nothing is so clean-cut and nothing is so black and white, but those seems to be the two tendencies right now. And there is indeed a tension between climate change and energy security.
Regarding the solutions to go away from fossil fuels, do you see only electrification, or what? Because we have to warm our homes and we have to cook our food, so we need energy. Where do you see the solutions?
You know, the reality is we cannot shut down fossil fuels tomorrow morning, right? The world still runs like 82% of all the energy in the world is the product of fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas and coal, which is kind of a little slowly diminishing, but still very, very, very important. So you don't get rid of 82% overnight. It takes time, it takes planning, it takes investment, it takes policy and regulation. It takes will at the level of
solutions, innovation,
and it needs breakthrough technologies. Now, we do have a lot of the technologies we need, actually, at least in terms of even beyond prototypes. They actually function, but we need to scale them up, right? And you know, creating a big solar plant doesn't take 3 months. It takes years. And it's not just a question of permissioning and so on. It's also a question of technology. It's also a question of access to the minerals and materials you need to build that, and so on. So the transition is going to take time. And we do have still enough time to do that if we get serious, if we plan it, and if we kind of create a sort of managed decline of fossil fuels and a managed increase of other sources of energy at the same time. But energy is not the only game. We also need to become more efficient with materials. We need to we need to insulate buildings. We need to figure out different ways of creating all the objects around us. You know, cement produces 7 or 8% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Unless we find a way to diminish that significantly, we're not going to win that battle. Same thing for steel and so on. So there is a full system change that is in front of us that requires all of that. It requires energy, but it also requires all the rest: investment, political will, regulation, new technologies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, on top there is this Paris Agreement of 1.5, or at least less than 2 degrees of increase.
Yeah.
What do you think? How much do we have to reduce the CO2 emissions? And if it's enough, only to reduce it? Or?
We need to go to zero. But you know, the other day, some CEO of a French public bank was on the record saying something like, this was just before the elections, by the way, the French election, was on the record saying something like, you know, we really, really are committed to make sure that global warming doesn't go beyond 3 or maybe 3.5 degrees Celsius. And when you listen to that, you realize how much lack of knowledge and awareness there is still in the world. Because a 3 degrees world is a world where most of humanity probably cannot live. in the sense that where they live now, they need to move to other places. A lot of the world is going to become unlivable. Already now, with 1 point something degrees of heating, we have heat domes. We have 50 degrees Celsius that stay for days. Right now in Delhi, it's something like 47 degrees Celsius. In Pakistan, there are regions that are beyond 50 right now. And so there are, the dramatic wildfires we've all seen, the dramatic floods we've all seen, and so on. Those are not going to go away unless we do something, unless we become really serious about lowering greenhouse gas emissions. And I know that in the mind of many people, 1 degree of difference is not that much because, we go from the winter to the summer, there are 20 degrees of difference and still we survive. But the reality is our bodies are not made for that level of consistent heat. Our infrastructure is not made for that level of consistent heat. There are airport runways that kind of melt away at 50 or 55 degrees, and rail tracks on which trains cannot run anymore because they open up like this under the pressure of the weight of the train, and so on. So we are really getting very close to a moment of real disruption beyond extreme weather events.
So are we at the point of no return already?
No, I don't think we are at the point of no return, but we need to get really serious about this. And
what about this technology to, let's say, take out CO2 out of the air? Have you heard about this?
Carbon removals, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there are different ways of removing carbon from the air, and some of them are natural. You plant trees. It's very effective. It's the best technology we have, but it takes time. A tree absorbs carbon as it grows. Essentially, a tree is carbon. And so it takes like 30 years to absorb a significant amount of carbon, with the risk that the tree burns and that carbon is released again in the atmosphere, right? So there are natural solutions like that, which also involve maintaining and restoring wetlands and peatlands and keeping rainforests as they are, and so and then there are engineered ways of withdrawing or drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. Some of them are already real, although they draw down very small amounts of carbon, and they're very expensive, especially they're expensive in energy. So right now we are at that point where the technology works, but it still uses too much energy and it still costs too much, and therefore we cannot scale it up. There is a hope that we can scale it up, and I think it's going to be inevitable that we need to find a way to scale it up, because even if we are absolutely disciplined and we decarbonize everything we can decarbonize through other means, reinventing all the materials I mentioned before, et cetera, we're going to get to a point where there are some percentages of that, some billions of tons of carbon that we cannot decarbonize. And they're going to come from places like agriculture, and they're going to come from places like long-distance flying, and so on. And so we need for that to be able to compensate by taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So we need to find a way to scale that up and reduce the price.
Since we are here at CASA SEAT, what about transportation and mobility? We are accustomed to travel all over the world. We are accustomed to buy products from all over the world at any time. So we would like to live in this world. Do we have to reduce this, or what do you see? What do you see here?
No, I think that we don't want to turn the world into a place where you don't travel anymore and you don't meet anymore and you don't discover places anymore, right? But we need to travel in a clean way, and that doesn't only mean let's replace my combustion car with an electric car, which is already a good step. But if we replace all the combustion cars with electric cars, we don't solve the problem for several reasons. The first one is electric cars require minerals and materials in big quantities that are environmentally unfriendly to produce. They're called rare earths, not because they're rare, but because the process between the extraction and their utilization is a process that is actually not very environmentally friendly. That's why most of it happens in China, for example, where they have less stringent laws about what you do in terms of industrial processes, and so. The second reason why it doesn't solve the problem is the individual transport problem is not only about my car has a tailpipe and therefore it pollutes. the individual transport problem is also the problem of traffic congestion. Is also the problem of, well, I need to get in the car to go buy bread because there is not a bakery within walking distance anymore. So the whole car-dependent lifestyle is not solved by shifting from combustion to electric. It's solved by redesigning the way we live in cities and in villages. It's solved by redesigning the way we distribute goods. It's solved by redesigning access to things like food and culture and sports and schools and so on, taking them away from the car logic and putting them towards either public transport logic or a walking distance kind of logic. There is this model developed by Carlos Moreno in Paris. He's an urbanist, and he has been advising the mayor of Paris, and now it's been adopted by other cities, called the 15-minute city. And this kind of is a thought model. It's not something that needs to be 50 minutes by the clock. It's a thought model that basically says, if you live in a city, you should be able to access the main things that make your urban life within 15 minutes of walking or biking. And the main things that make your urban life is not going once a year to the opera. That can be on the other side of town. But it is going and buy food, take your kids to school, access culture and sports facilities, going to work, and so on. So how do we re-engineer a city, the design of a city, to make that possible so that we don't need a car?
Technology can help us a lot here. In December, we had a TEDx Barcelona Salon event here where we were talking about the future of work. Especially the pandemic changed a lot how people were working. And we had here an expert from McKinsey, Pablo Hernandez, who asked many companies about what they were asking from their employees. But the point is that we had also an issue that we had an idea that technology helps us to work from home, and at the same time, technology helps us to reduce carbon emissions, because if everybody works from home, so you reduce the traffic and mobility needs. How do you see the future of work in general, or maybe in particular here regarding climate change, but in general?
Yeah.
Also,
it's a very difficult question. I don't think there is one future of work in the sense of everybody's going to work from home or everybody's going to go back to the office. Definitely, and by the way, all this applies only to people who can work from home, meaning work from a computer or from a phone or from a tablet, right? Many people cannot do that. They go to the warehouse, they drive a truck to distribute the stuff that the people working at home need, or go to the fields to pick tomatoes. So, but for those who can work from home or can work from a distance, remotely, I think the future is going to be some form of hybrid, but it's going to be a different hybrid depending on the kind of job you do, depending on the kind of company you work for, depending on the type of product or project you're working on, and so on. There are many misunderstandings about the experience we've had working from home over the last couple of years. For example, I keep hearing people that tell me, oh, I've been doing smart working for the last couple of years. And they're like, no, you have not been doing smart working. What you've been doing is working remotely in a state of emergency, because from Friday to Monday we were told to stay home, without having the appropriate setup, resources, infrastructure. A lot of people are still working out of their kitchen table. That's not smart working. That's worse conditions than at the office, right? And so some companies have taken steps to give training and resources and tools to their employees to work remotely, to fund that, to avoid the classic, I'm here talking to you on Zoom, but there is my bed there and it's not really made and it doesn't look great, which doesn't reflect.
The bed is there.
Exactly.
The bed is there. You're sitting in front and the bed is
you can change
front.
it. But all those things don't qualify as a long-term, well-structured, properly resourced working from afar. They qualify as temporary solution for a situation in which we all find ourselves that was kind of an emergency. And so all the stuff needs to be thought through if we want to really keep people working remotely, at least for part of the time. Another thing we discovered during the pandemic is our homes are not made to stay at home all the time. Our homes are made to come in, have dinner, sleep, go to the office. And then we come in and have dinner, sleep, change, go to the office. So they are kind of a sort of warehousing for clothes and books and other things, plus the toys for the kids. They are places where you can socialize as a family or also with friends for specific amounts of time. I invite you over for dinner, or the kids have a sleepover, or these kind of things. But if you have to stay with the full family in your house for a month, working from there and going to school from there, our homes are not designed for that, unless you have a big villa with 2 bungalows, right? And so we need to rethink that as well if we want to keep people working from home. But they could potentially work remotely without being at home. They could be in neighborhood shared spaces, for example, or so. There are different solutions to that. And the last element to consider is this. We tend to look at this as a technology problem. So, okay, I'm not going to the office anymore, so I just need a laptop, a big screen, a backup, 2 lights for the Zoom calls, and the problem is solved. It's actually primarily a management and a social problem, meaning your manager needs to accept that you're not in the office, so cannot count the hours where you're seated at your desk. Your colleagues need to find ways to interact with you beyond the screen, because that's how you build trust and social capital that makes our work as a team possible. And that's why I think that the solution is somewhere in the middle. It's some form of hybrid. Work away for 2 days, go to the office 2 days. Work away for 2 days, and once a week we have a full staff meeting, and the other 2 days you choose what to do. This kind of solutions.
If I may add, it's also a communication problem. The more you work remotely, the more communication you need, because usually when you're in the same office, there's a lot of non-verbal communication.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah, but still, technology had a big impact, and thanks to technology, we were able to work from home. How do you see, again, because we are here at CASA SEAT, how do you see the impact of technology in mobility?
Well, there's a lot of talk about self-driving cars, for example. And I don't think that those are fully self-driving cars are for tomorrow. Right now, the best you have right now, even though it may be called, full self-driving, it's some significant support for driving when the driving conditions are ideal, meaning there is actually a road that has very visible white lines, so the camera of the car can see the white lines.
No other cars.
Sorry?
No other cars.
And so in ideal conditions, right? But the moment it snows, the car doesn't know what to do, and so it's stuck there. So self-driving cars may be a thing, but they're still far away, with one exception, and the exception is the routes that are predefined. For example, a big university campus, and you have an automatic robotic car that takes you from point A, point B, without tracks. It's not a train, and without a driver, because you can pre-program the route, and it's always the same route, right? And that you can do. And because it's controlled, you can even adjust the route to the car. You can, take away a corner and make it smoother or whatever else. And once you've done it, then that route is doable. Then there are many other things that are happening with cars and mobility. Many of them have to do with how the car is connected to the network and to other cars, which means that you can, for example, and we already can do that with Waze and other mapping systems, we can see where there is congestion, and so we can take another route. That's incredibly useful, and that's possible only because all the cars that are in the congestion are sending to the system the information, I'm stuck here. And so the other car, which is yours, coming behind, sees that and suggests another route. So all this connection between cars and network and between cars and other cars, I think is really gonna facilitate a lot of things. And then there is the last question of cars right now are no longer cars, meaning an engine, and so they are essentially computers with wheels. And so what can you do when you have a computer with wheels? Probably you can do more than what we are doing now to be explored. But the concept of a car is really shifting in that sense.
It's more important that it's a computer and less important that it's a car. That's what you want to say, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. because technology is getting more and more important. But if it's getting more and more important, are there also, because we were talking about solutions, how it's impacting us, and are there also risks attached to technology? Usually everything has a risk. What would you say is
Yeah,
risk
huge
technology?
risks, of course. I mean, we can talk about any kind of technology, of course, because it ranges from digital to synthetic biology and everything in between. But yeah, every technology comes with risks, and the biggest risk is that the people and the companies developing the technology don't think that the technology involves potential risks, and so they don't build that thinking into their development. Right? It's okay, we develop it, and then we try it. And then we will discover a problem, and then we will fix the problem after we discover it. And that's not a good way of avoiding the risks. The classic example is Facebook. Let's build Facebook. Let's build all the function we want. Let's have machine learning that defines how people connect and what people see and all these kind of things. Facebook is essentially a big society-size AI experiment gone wrong.
Gone wrong.
And it went, well, yeah, it has brought so much wreckage and damage everywhere. I know that you can connect with your long-lost friend from college, but it has brought so much damage to society, democracy, freedom of speech, culture, and that's not because Facebook is inherently bad. It's because that thinking was never considered in the development of the technology until we hit the problem, and then let's try to fix the problem, but it's too late to fix the problem. Right.
When you talk about Facebook and communication and freedom of speech, it comes into my mind Twitter. Do you still have a Twitter? Do you still have a Twitter account, or did you delete it?
I have a Twitter account that I never use. I think I've tweeted 3 times in my life. Okay. One of which recently about Ukraine, but no, I'm not a Twitter user. Mostly because my brain doesn't function for 280 degrees. As you can see, I keep talking. I have a long forma mentis, and so I tend to stay away from that.
For all of you who haven't seen it, 2 weeks ago at the TED conference, Elon Musk was a guest, and he was interviewed by Chris Anderson. And in this interview, Elon Musk shared his vision about freedom of speech, and that he made an offer to to pay out the shareholders of Twitter, because he wanted to make Twitter private. Yep. And then his idea is to open up the source code and to eliminate the spam bots, and to make it, let's say, a neutral platform, a platform for freedom of speech without censorship. This created a lot of controversy. Mm-hmm. Before I ask you about what your take on this is, can you maybe see what will happen after this really takes place? Now he hasn't bought it yet, but he's in the process of. Yeah. Maybe in 3 or 5 years' time, what do you think will Twitter become if this really...
Yeah, listen, is an incredibly difficult question. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows because it's impossible to know what's in the mind of Elon Musk. Nobody really knows because the notion that we take a platform that is essentially the global public square, and we open up to everything without oversight and without filtering in the name of freedom of speech, of a misinterpreted version of freedom of speech, because free for all is not freedom of speech, are 2 very different things. Nobody really knows what's happening, what's going to happen. What we know is the way Musk uses Twitter himself. And I think that's the closest approximation, right? The way he's using it today, and the way he has been using it for years, is probably the way he understands what Twitter is. And so maybe that's the way Twitter is going to be. And the way he uses Twitter is to taunt people, to troll people, to mobilize people against other people, to insult authorities, particularly financial control authorities.
SEC.
The SEC in the United States, and so on. He's not a very subtle user of Twitter, to say the least, right? And if that's the way he understands what Twitter is, then probably that's the way he's going to try to make Twitter be. So I have some doubts that it's going to be a healthier place for public discourse. I'm sure it's going to be a freer place, a much more free place in the terms of free for all, not in the terms of freedom of speech as defined by the law, but it's certainly not going to be a healthier place.
So it means you may delete your Twitter account.
Probably going to delete my account, although my account doesn't matter at all because I have 0 followers.
Okay, let's end up with with all this technology and world stuff, and now go a bit of your personal life. You have been last year at Antarctica.
In Antarctica, yes.
Yes. Why Antarctica?
So it's interesting because when you tell people I'm going to go to Antarctica, and those are some pictures we took there,
Yes.
the first thing people ask you is why Antarctica, and you can answer by saying, just because it's there, or you can answer by saying, and that's my answer, in order to understand some things about the world, we need to go to places that are really extreme in the world. And Antarctica is possibly the most extreme place there is in the world. Now, think of all the places you would qualify as extreme. Deserts, the northern reaches of Canada or Sweden or Norway or Siberia, the Himalaya. All those places have had and have a human history. They have people. They have local cultures and local civilizations. They have myths and poetry that has been languages, and they have infrastructure. Antarctica has none of that. Antarctica is the only continent in the world that has no human history whatsoever. I'm not talking about the explorers going there and then going back home. I'm not talking about the scientists going there and then going back home. I'm talking about population from there, none, right? This is a continent 1.5 times the size of the United States and doesn't have a single tree, not one. 98% is covered by ice or snow, 2% by gravel, like you see there in that picture. Those are kind of the beaches of Antarctica. There are wild grasses, as you see on the back here of this picture, but that's essentially all there is in terms of vegetation. So there is nothing in Antarctica to support human life. There are between 6,000 and 10,000 scientists that work in several dozen science research stations there. But they all come from another continent, and they're all going to go back to another continent. They're all fully supported by resources coming from another continent: food, fuel, housing, everything, right? And so even water doesn't exist in most of Antarctica. I know that you see this and say, oh, water is there. But actually, to melt the snow and the ice, you need fuel, and the fuel comes from outside. And if you don't have the fuel, you cannot melt it, so you cannot drink it. So it's as extreme as you can go without leaving planet Earth. And Antarctica tells us a lot of interesting things about the past and the future of the planet. For example, in the middle of the continent, so Antarctica is actually a continent, is a rock. It's not like the North Pole, which is ice floating on water, right? In the middle of the continent, the ice is more than 3,000 meters thick. This is ice that has accumulated as snow that falls on snow and falls on snow and then becomes ice over the centuries and the millennia and the hundreds of millennia, which means that in the ice, there are particles of air that are captured, bubbles of air, micro bubbles of air. The snow falls, the air is there, other snow falls, captures the air, becomes ice, stays there for hundreds of thousands of years. Scientists have been going down with digging out ice cores for 3,000 meters, which means going back like 700,000 years in history. And then you pull them up and you measure those bubbles. You crack those bubbles and you measure what's in the air. And one of the things that looking at the history of humanity through the ice cores of Antarctica they have discovered is that there is a perfect correlation between the presence of CO2 in the atmosphere and the average temperature of the globe over hundreds of thousands of years, not since 1950, right? Hundreds of thousands of years, when humans were not even around. Or in the case, Homo sapiens was not around. So that's kind of one of the things that Antarctica tells you about the history. And then it tells you about the future. It tells you about the future because it's one of the places in the world that on average is heating faster. So you have melting ice. Now, one of the things I learned and I never realized before going to Antarctica is that not all ice is equal. You have the ice that sits on the continent, and then you have the ice that is at the edges and kind of slowly kind of moves into the water, and then you have the ice that floats on the water, big icebergs and so. Once the ice is on the water, if it melts, it doesn't do much because it's like an ice cube in the glass of water. You put in the ice cube, the water goes up a little bit, but when the ice cube melts, it doesn't change anything. The problem is, the more the ice at the edges of the continent melts, the less it keeps up the big glaciers in the center, and they start to slide towards the ocean faster and faster and faster. It's not something that's going to happen, not even within our capacity to see it, right? It's still a slow process, but the acceleration is problematic. So all these kind of things you can see only in a place like Antarctica.
So this is more or less like a measure to, let's say, an image or let's say a mirror about climate change, right? You can see the effects of climate change there, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, okay. You brought us some beautiful images here.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk something about the animals there? Tell us something about this to close it.
Look at this image here, right? So one of the amazing things about Antarctica is it has relatively few species of animals. There are like 5 or 6 species of penguins, and there are a dozen or 15 different types of birds. And so, but there is an incredible number of individuals per species. So this is a picture we took in the first half of the trip. We were not yet technically in Antarctica. We were in one of the islands at the edges. And you arrive, and essentially by boat you enter a big harbor, and the harbor is like this half moon, 3 miles long, right, like that. And you have the glaciers and the snow, and then you have this band of a little bit of grass and gravel, and then you have the ocean. And the closer you get, the more you realize that whole band of gravel is covered with penguins. And they're not 1,000, they are 100,000, 200,000, right? These immense masses of animals there, just at the edges of the continent. And then you go into your small boat, the Zodiac, and you go to the beach and walk among the penguins and take these pictures and so. The rule is that you cannot get closer than 5 meters, but they don't know the rule. Nobody told them, and so they come up to you, and they're not intimidated at all, right? Probably they're not seen enough humans yet to be intimidated by humans, and so they just walk around you. They look at you with curiosity, and then they walk away, and they go and slap another penguin, and then they come back, and so it's a pretty impressive kind of moment.
So. Thank you very much for this image, and also thank you very much for this interview.
Absolutely.
I think with this image we can close now this interview, and let's open now the question and answer session for the whole audience. And who wants to ask a question?
There is a microphone coming, so wait for them because they're recording this,
here,
I'm told. So.
Here and there.
Okay, since I have the mic, I'll go first. So I think it's pretty interesting the mindset that we have around on type of solutions that it's being in place for solving these non-scalable solutions in place actually, which we're putting technology in order to probably get a better energy systems. We're putting technology probably to feed linear processes of production that at the end of the day we have to correct by planting trees. So ergo, we're putting all the human efforts on non-scalable solutions, at least short term. Why do you think the humans are not able to program? Because we know how to code. We're very smart. I have a lot of software engineers. But it would be so easy to basically code people creating these lifestyles that actually can trigger sustainable lifestyles, sustainable solutions that will break the non-scalable processes that we have today for production and for consumption. So why are there not more investment in tech talks, investment on coding people to change these lifestyles?
Listen, first of all, the thing we need to say, which I should have said before, is we don't only need to decarbonize the systems, we also need to consume less energy, period, right? That's a given, and significantly less energy. The question about changing lifestyles is really complicated because what you and I assume is a normal or clean lifestyle is not the same thing that somebody else assumes is a normal and clean lifestyle. There are, you know, and we tend to think, oh, they don't understand the problem, they don't know about climate, they are, you know, not necessarily, but they live in different conditions, they have a different kind of experience. And so changing lifestyles is something that is incredibly difficult to do unless you have a possibility to do it top down. The president decides, everybody executes. That's not exactly the kind of reality in which we live in Europe in particular and in the West. And so how do you change attitudes bottom up? It's a gigantic challenge. There is a question of how do you communicate. There's a question of raising awareness. There's a question of helping people not be scared about change. A lot of people are not climate deniers. The climate deniers are only like 6 or 7% of the population, according to surveys, particularly in the United States, with probably the biggest concentration. But a lot of people are just concerned and scared about change, and they see this big change coming. And so they tend to kind of protect themselves against that. How do you convince these people to change their lifestyles? So there is that element. And there is an element which is more about systems. There are places where if you want to change your lifestyle, you practically can't. You can't because there is no public transportation, so you need to have a car. You can't because in the whole city there is not a place where you can find affordable, fresh vegetables and fruit, and so you buy packaged food, and so on. So the way the system offers you choices or doesn't offer you choices is also very, very important, and we need to work through that as well. And just giving you 2 examples, there are other points as well that we could cover.
My name is Andrew Funk from Homeless Entrepreneur. Andrew Funk from Homeless Entrepreneur. Considering and kind of going where you guys were going, considering the fact that people experiencing poverty are those most affected by uncertainty, how do you think that they can be included in the process of making the world a healthier place?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of talk about technology, process, etc., but without people, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And considering 49% of the population is poorer than the other, how can we include them in this process?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very important point. Thank you for raising it. So this transition cannot only be technological or financial or even political. It needs to be just and they need to be equal, right? Right now we are in this crazy situation in the world where the people who have contributed the less to the problem are those that are feeling the impacts already in the strongest way. You know, coastal erosion in Africa, droughts in India, floods in various parts of the world, and so on. Not only they're feeling the impacts in the strongest way, but they're less equipped than others because they're poor and because they don't have infrastructure and because they don't have resources to mobilize to confront that and to prepare more resilient societies in a way. You know, if a flood comes to Barcelona or to Geneva, where I live, we have plenty of resources to resurrect our normal way of functioning pretty fast. There's going to be suffering. There's going to be people potentially dying. There's going to be destruction, but we can reconstruct. We can reconstruct pretty fast. We have public money, private money, insurance, plenty of things. None of that exists in a place like South Africa, where suddenly a flooding comes and wipes away the livelihoods of thousands of people and kills 500 people, right? And so we need to include absolutely the question of fairness and justice in the transition we are designing. And by the way, this is not only a north-south kind of problem, it's also a south-south and a north-north kind of problem, because there are situations of poverty and of lack of infrastructure and lack of access to infrastructure as well in rich countries. So.
Thank you. So My question goes more maybe in the business development of TED.
Of TED, yes.
Yeah. And particularly in this co-branding strategy with TEDx.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm super interested in how was this initial thought or challenge to create TEDx, because I was super fascinated at the time that you did it. And so yeah, how was this initial phase? Then how was this decentralization, as I feel it? And then how, and also maybe a question for both, how they interact and in a way, how they co-live these two brands and nurture.
So, and for those who were not totally interested in TED, indulge me. I'm gonna tell the story of how that happened, because I think it's an interesting story about how some things may happen organically and as a movement in a way, rather than in a planned way, right? What happened is this. TED has been around for a long time. It started in 1984 as a conference. It was run for a long time as a for-profit conference, then it was turned into a non-profit entity, and until 2005, you would not have found any video from TED online because there was none published online. In 2006, we started publishing the first few videos, and we started getting two kinds of reactions. The first kind of reaction was, what you do is fantastic. And the second kind of reaction was, what you do is fantastic. Why don't you come to Barcelona and organize a conference here? We need a conference like TED. Why don't you come to Kuala Lumpur and organize a conference here? We need a conference like TED. And back then we were like 10 people or 12 people. And so we were kind of, no, wait a second. We can't go around the world and organize conferences everywhere. We don't have the resources. We don't have the time. And so we kept answering no to this kind of desire coming from the TED community and the people who were discovering TED through the videos for doing something a la TED in their city, in their region, and so. But answering no to a question that keeps coming with enthusiasm and interest and so is not really satisfying. And so we tried to figure out, is there another answer? And the other answer was, we cannot come to Barcelona and organize a TED conference there because our annual conference takes place somewhere else once a year, but you can do it. You can do it if you agree to take a license, which is free. There's no money involved. But the license is a contract, which means you need to commit to respect a certain set of rules. And the rules are designed for two things. They're designed to push you to do an event that looks and feels very much like the event we would do if we were there, choice of speakers and these kind of things. But it's also designed to be flexible enough so that it gives a framework, it gives a frame, but you can adapt the frame to the local conditions, which means you can do the event in Spanish or in Catalan. You can do the event in a small room like this or in a big theater with 3,000 people. You can do the event with high level of productions because you know how to do it and you have the resources. You can do it with low level productions if you are in a slum in Nairobi, for example. And all of that is possible, and all of that is part of the same movement and the same ethos, right? And so Jose is the head of TEDx Barcelona, and there is a head of TEDx Nairobi, and they have completely different resources and capacity to organize an event, but they are part of the same thing. And so we launched this in 2009, and we thought, and we were totally wrong, we thought we're going to maybe get 30 events a year. And we were kind of happy because we were organizing 2 conferences a year, so we would go from 2 to 32, and we had only to organize 2 of them, and the others somebody else would do. And it started taking off like wildfire. And somebody did it in a city, and somebody else in a city decided they wanted to do it as well. And then a big team created something, and then the team split in 2, and they created 2 different things. And it went to, at the end of 2019, so the last year pre-pandemic, we had 3,800 something events, which means more than 10 events a day on average, all around the world, right? Because of this possibility to adjust to the local reality and do according to your means and your resources and your intentions and so, but still sticking to the rules in terms of choosing the speakers, the topics, etc. So there are now billions of views on the TEDx YouTube channel and so on. So that's how it happened. And that's how it's still working today. Along the line, we have adjusted the license rules to respond to certain needs of the organizers and so on. But roughly, the concept is still the same that we put in place back then. And from the perspective of TED, it's amazing to have 3,000 events around the world every year without us being directly involved to organize them. Not because that creates any financial advantage, but because that creates spaces for conversations locally that are very important to the local community, and which we could never make that happen because we don't have the resources for that. We don't master 75 languages and all these kind of things.
Plus the video which are produced, because we film the videos of the talks, so it's not only the events, but because the legacy
totally.
are the videos.
So
you have the events, this is one-time event, but then you have the videos which stay forever. So we make 8 or 10 videos on each big event, and so you multiply this by 3,000.
No, there are tens of thousands of videos on the TEDx YouTube channel, and they have been seen by many billions of times. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and by the way, some TEDx events do better events than us. So yeah.
There's 2 questions more here.
Yeah, I don't see the back one. No, now I see you. Yes.
I'm just going to stand up real quick. So before you were talking about inevitability in terms of climate change. And my question is regarding to the nature of mankind. Are you optimistic enough that if we are faced with this inevitable need to take up more stringent measures, will we be able to trust ourselves to carry those out?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, as you can imagine. Today a journalist asked me a similar question, and I told her, I'm not optimistic, I'm possibilistic. Meaning I believe in the possibility of confronting this in a serious way and bending that curve that is taking right now us in a wrong direction. But then many things can happen that may disrupt that. The war in Ukraine is an example, as we discussed before. But somehow, fundamentally, I still believe there is a deep capacity in humanity to react to life-threatening situations and collaborate to find solutions. It may mean that we need to go all the way into the problem before starting reacting seriously, right? And maybe we are not yet all the way into the problem, but I think it's there is a fundamental humanness there that can react.
Hi, thanks very much. So my question was very much along the same lines, actually. So how can we incentivize the global powers to deal with this? We've had a relatively benign crisis the last couple of years that the world as a whole, in my opinion, has dealt with very poorly. The climate change is a much more serious crisis. How can we make sure that everybody works together? Because maybe America just says, I'm not bothered. China says, I'm not bothered. India says, I need to develop. I'm not bothered.
Yeah. So a lot of that I'm not bothered is going to change soon, because the reality is very practical things are going to happen, and they're already happening right now, that are going to impact everybody. It's not only a question of energy prices, it's a question of food shortages, for example, right? And now we read about riots in Sri Lanka and riots in some places in North Africa, but food shortages are going to come to developed countries as well. Not as dramatic and so, but we're going to start noticing this kind of things. Migration is another flashpoint. We think that there are many migrants and refugees today in the world. Well, let's wait another 10 years, right? If things continue to go the same way, the curve is going to go this way, because some places in the world have become inhabitable. And so people are not just going to run away from conflicts, they're going to run away from a place where they just simply cannot live anymore. And so all those elements are going to become very evident also for governments, and potentially will tend to dismiss the issue or to just push it into the future and say, we'll deal with that afterwards. We'll deal with that when we are rich, when we have solved the war, when we have solved energy security, when we have done this or that. The current global context is not really conducive to global discussions and agreement about how to solve a global problem altogether, unfortunately, right? And the Russian invasion of Ukraine has made things worse. There was already dysfunctional before, but there was somehow a momentum towards the end of last year that was somehow hopeful. Many people think, mostly because Greta Thunberg said so, that COP26, the United Nations Climate Conference, was a failure. It was not. A lot of commitments were made there that was really, really significant. So it wasn't this amazing moment of togetherness, but we kind of were still on the right trajectory. But then what has happened in the last couple of months is there is a breakdown of the global system that has been provoked by the ripple effects of the war in Ukraine. And we can list a lot of the other effects, by the way, of the war. It's already really shifted everything at many levels. But in terms of the international system, it's very difficult to imagine today the United States, China, India, and the European Union and Russia sit at the same table to hammer out a climate change agreement, for example. It may come back. It may happen again that we find a situation where major powers will work together. It has happened in the past. At the height of the nuclear tensions of the late 50s, early 60s, countries around the world came together, including the Soviet Union and the United States, to protect Antarctica, for example, since you spoke before about Antarctica, with an Antarctic treaty. So things are possible, but for now it seems the system is kind of breaking down.
And here we have the last question.
I don't see you, so raise your hand or something. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not going to fall any further. I believe you are trained in economics. So
not really in political science, but that's okay. Keep going.
So in economics, we have this bad habit of designing curves very smooth. Yeah. Do you believe that the word transition is actually very accurate in order to describe what we are engaging in right now, and that's a process that might be a bit more chaotic? Yeah. This being my first question, relating to the second one, which is, I don't think the word has been mentioned, but you mentioned that we need to reduce our energy consumption. Mm-hmm. So this makes echo with me directly to degrowth. What do you think about that, this concept at least?
So in terms of the transition, no, it's not a perfect word at all. It's a useful word because people understand immediately what it is, right? But then it also suggests that we go from a situation that's kind of, color X to a situation that's similar, just color Y, and nothing much else changed, which I don't think is what we need to do. So definitely is not an ideal word, but it's a word that people understand, and so it's a useful concept. In terms of degrowth, so you make the assumption that if we consume less energy, we definitely need to go into a logic of degrowth. And some people would debate that and say, well, that's a vision, but there is another vision where you can actually decouple the consumption of energy from the trajectory of growth of the Earth. I personally believe that there is some level of degrowth that's going to be inevitable, but it doesn't mean that it needs to come at the expense of quality of life, and so it means that it comes at the expense of waste. Waste is immense in the world in any possible way. It comes at the expense of efficiency and other things like that. Degrowth is one of those words that terrify people, because you put that word on the table and it looks like I need to give up my freedom, my car, my vacation, my big home, and so on. So it's a word that needs, every time it's mentioned, it needs to come with many, many sentences that explain what it is. Otherwise, it really terrifies people.
So we have heard it already. CASA SEAT has to close soon. So we are almost at the end of our conversation. We talked about energy, technology, working, impact of work, also about mobility. Now I have one very last question. My personal question is, you are the curator of TED Global, and you were able to invite and convince not only once, but twice, the Pope, Papa Francisco, to give a talk at TED Global. So, no, at TED actually, at the TED conference. So tell me, what do I have to do in order to invite him to make a TED talk at TEDx Barcelona?
Oh la la. So, Pope Francis gave his first TED talk in 2017. And it was the first time any Pope has ever spoken at a conference like TED. And it took almost 2 years to get that talk. So the first time I approached the Vatican, it was like a blank face. It's like, what is TED? Nobody knew anything about us. Nobody knew anything about what we were doing, and so on. So there was a lot of explaining to do, a lot of convincing, a lot of asking people in the TED community to help me contact people at the Vatican.
So it was your idea, you personally? No,
well, it was the team. But because at the time I was the European director, then that was my responsibility to make that happen. And so little by little, you kind of get to understand how the Vatican functions and who really has something to say and who speaks to the Pope every day and who doesn't, and so on. And I could benefit from a lot of people in the TED community who knew people and therefore helped open doors and so on. But the conversation kind of went and then stopped and then went and then stopped, and the kind of usual things. But little by little, we got close to the notion that this would be a useful use of the Pope's time and energy to do a talk. And the Pope is, we tend to think that, just he does his thing every day, but the Pope is one of the most on-demand persons in the world, right? Every day he receives a stack of of requests. Anything from, can you send a prayer for the opening of the Catholic school in the Philippines, or can you come to Assisi for this conference, or can you meet with this ambassador, right? And hundreds of other requests like that from all over the world. He's the head of a church of more than 1 billion people, so you can imagine the kind of demand on his time. So I needed to make the case for this thing is going to be a good use of some of his time and some of his attention. And I managed to make that case, and then one day I got a text message from a Monsignor in the Vatican who was my main contact, who said, the Pope said yes. That's all there was in the SMS, which was a pretty good day. But then we needed to start discussing about, okay, so what's the talk about? What's it going to be saying? How do we physically produce it? And so we ended up filming the talk in the studios in his studio, but with the team from Vatican TV. And that was about 5 weeks before our annual conference. And then we kept the talk secret. We kept the whole thing secret because what we did was we prepared for a launch at the conference without announcing the presence of the Pope. And the reason why we did it on video is because when the Pope travels, 200 people travel with him, right? And when the Pope travels, then he celebrates a mass to the Catholics in the country, and he meets the president. So it's unimaginable the Pope travels to come to a conference and just goes back home, right? So we did it on video. And we also produced subtitles in 20 languages, even before showing the video at the conference. So the moment we released it, it was immediately available in 21 languages to try to make it as accessible as possible. So at a certain point, I had something like 80 or 90 people who knew of what we were doing. His team, the team of Vatican Television, my translators, my media team, and we managed to keep the secret. And the program of the conference said, surprise guest. And so at the conference, people kept asking me, so who's the surprise guest? And I kept answering, it's a head of state. And it's true, the Pope is a head of state. But nobody thinks of the Pope as a head of state. So nobody imagined that it could be him. People thought it's going to be Barack Obama or so. No. And so we managed to keep the secret. And then at a certain point during a session, just went on stage and introduced the thing. And it was this big moment. Oh my God, the Pope is speaking at TED. So that's how it happened. And then the second one was easier because by then they knew what TED was. And the second one was when we launched our big climate initiative. And he had just published a few months before his encyclical letter, his book about climate, called Laudato Si. And so the talk was a sort of excerpt or summary of the book, and that was in October 2020. So.
Okay. So maybe you can do the invitation to TEDx Barcelona.
Yeah, we can send it in Spanish, of course, and yes.
Okay, a big applause. Thank you very much to
Thank
Bruno.
you. Thank you. Thank you.